Sarah Martinez sat on her bunk in the cramped barracks, methodically cleaning her rifle with the precision that had been drilled into her for years. The other recruits around her were talking loudly, joking about their first week of basic training, but Sarah remained focused on her weapon. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, and efficient. She had learned long ago that a clean weapon could mean the difference between life and death. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she disassembled the rifle completely, laying each part on the white towel she had spread across her lap. Her hands moved without hesitation, muscle memory guiding every action. While the other recruits struggled with basic weapon maintenance during their daily inspections, Sarah could strip and clean her rifle in under 3 minutes. "Hey, Martinez," called out Tommy Rodriguez from the bunk across from her. "You've been cleaning that thing for like an hour." "It's probably cleaner than the day it was made." Sarah looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "Just want to make sure it's perfect for tomorrow's inspection." What Tommy and the others didn't know was that Sarah had been handling weapons like this for the past 8 years, not in some civilian shooting range or hunting trips with family, but in the most dangerous places on Earth. Places where one dirty round could cost lives, where equipment failure meant mission failure, and where mission failure often meant never coming home. She continued her cleaning routine, using a small brush to clean the bolt carrier group. Her movements were so smooth and automatic that she didn't even need to look at what she was doing. Instead, her mind wandered to memories she tried hard to keep buried. The sand of Afghanistan coating everything in sight, the weight of a full pack during a 20-mile night march, the sound of helicopters cutting through the darkness as her team prepared for another classified operation. "Martinez seems weird, doesn't she?" whispered Jenny Walsh from the bunk next to Tommy's. "I mean, she's too good at everything. PT, weapons training, even the way she makes her bed. It's like she's done all this before." Sarah's hands never paused, but her ears picked up every word. She had been careful to hold back during training, trying not to stand out too much. But old habits died hard. When the drill sergeant screamed in her face, she remained calm because she had faced real enemy fire. When they made the recruits do push-ups until their arms gave out, she barely broke a sweat because she had trained her body far beyond what basic training demanded. The truth was that Sarah Martinez had already served her country for 8 years as a Navy SEAL. Not many people knew that women had been quietly integrated into special operations units over the past decade. Even fewer knew about the classified missions these female operators had carried out in places the public would never hear about. 3 months ago, Sarah had been Petty Officer First Class Martinez, leading a team of elite commandos through hostile territory in Syria. She had been one of the most decorated female special operations soldiers in the military, with commendations that would never see the light of day due to their classified nature. Her record included successful hostage rescues, high-value target eliminations, and intelligence-gathering missions that had prevented terrorist attacks on American soil. But something had happened during her last mission. Something that had changed everything and forced her to make the hardest decision of her life. She had walked away from the SEALs, away from the brotherhood that had become her family, away from the only life she had known as an adult, and now, here she was, pretending to be just another young recruit trying to make it through basic training. As she reassembled her rifle, Sarah's fingers traced along a small scar on the weapon's stock. It was barely visible, but she knew it was there. Just like the scars that covered parts of her body, hidden beneath her uniform, scars that told stories she could never share with these young recruits who thought they knew what military service meant. The barracks door suddenly swung open, and Drill Sergeant Williams marched in. The room fell silent instantly, as all 20 recruits snapped to attention beside their bunks. "Listen up, maggots," Williams shouted. "Tomorrow morning, we're having a special inspection. General Patricia Hayes will be touring our facility, and she wants to see how our newest recruits are progressing." Sarah's blood ran cold. General Hayes. She knew that name very well. Hayes had been a colonel 5 years ago, when she had personally recommended Sarah for her first classified mission. Hayes was one of the few people in the entire military who would recognize her instantly. "I expect every single one of you to be perfect tomorrow," Williams continued. "Uniforms pressed, boots polished, weapons spotless. If any of you embarrass me in front of the general, You'll be scrubbing latrines with a toothbrush for the next month." After Williams left, the barracks erupted in nervous chatter about the upcoming inspection. Sarah sat back down on her bunk, her mind racing. She had been so careful to choose a different branch of service, to enlist under circumstances that would keep her past hidden. She had even changed her appearance, cutting her long hair short and losing the muscle mass that had made her so effective in special operations. But General Hayes had a memory like a steel trap, especially when it came to the soldiers who had served under her command in classified operations. If Hayes saw her tomorrow, if she looked closely enough, Sarah's carefully constructed new identity would crumble in seconds. Tommy noticed her sudden change in demeanor. "You okay, Martinez? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just nervous about the inspection," Sarah lied, forcing another smile. "I've never met a general before." That night, as the other recruits slept, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about running, about finding some excuse to miss the inspection, but she had already committed to this new path, this chance to serve her country in a different way, without the weight of classified missions and the constant danger that had defined her previous military career. She thought about why she had left the SEALs in the first place. The nightmares that had started after her last mission. The way she had begun to question everything she had been trained to do without hesitation. The realization that 8 years of constant warfare had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. More than anything, she thought about Maria Gonzalez, her best friend and teammate, who hadn't come home from that last mission. Maria, who had died because Sarah had made a split-second decision that saved the hostages, but cost her friend her life. The decision that had earned Sarah another commendation and sent her into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt that had ultimately driven her away from special operations. As dawn approached, Sarah made her decision. She would go through with the inspection, face whatever consequences came from being recognized, and deal with the fallout. She had survived 8 years in the most dangerous job in the military. She could survive one inspection, but as she finally drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything once again. General Hayes was not just any officer. She was a woman who had spent her entire career fighting for recognition in a male-dominated military, and she had a reputation for never forgetting the faces of exceptional soldiers. The morning alarm would sound in just a few hours, and Sarah Martinez would have to decide whether she was ready to face her past or continue running from it. The morning came faster than Sarah had hoped. The sound of the wake-up call echoed through the barracks at 0500 hours, and within minutes, 20 recruits were scrambling to prepare for what would be the most important inspection of their basic training. Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere. She had spent the remaining hours of the night thinking about every possible scenario that could unfold when General Hayes arrived. Maybe the general wouldn't remember her. Maybe she had changed enough that recognition would be impossible. Maybe Hayes would see her but choose not to say anything. But deep down, Sarah knew these were false hopes. Patricia Hayes had risen through the ranks by paying attention to details that others missed. She had a photographic memory for faces, especially the faces of soldiers who had served with distinction under her command. "Fall in," Drill Sergeant Williams shouted as the recruits assembled in the hallway. "I want everyone in formation outside, in exactly 3 minutes." The general's convoy just passed through the main gate. Sarah took her position in the formation, standing at attention with her rifle held in the proper inspection position. She had polished every piece of metal on the weapon until it gleamed like a mirror. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, and her boots reflected the morning sun. To anyone watching, she looked like just another recruit trying to impress a visiting general. The convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the training building exactly at 0800 hours. General Patricia Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle, her uniform decorated with ribbons that represented decades of distinguished service. She was a tall woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes had the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most respected officers in the military. Hayes was accompanied by her aide-de-camp, Colonel James Morrison, and several other high-ranking officers. As they approached the formation, Drill Sergeant Williams called the recruits to attention and began his report. "Ma'am, Alpha Company, 1st Platoon, standing ready for your inspection. 20 recruits, all present and accounted for." General Hayes nodded and began walking slowly down the line of recruits. She stopped at each one, asking brief questions about their training, their backgrounds, and their goals in the military. Her questions were designed to test not just their knowledge but their character and commitment. Sarah was positioned in the middle of the formation, which meant she would have several minutes to watch the general's inspection style before her own turn came. Hayes was thorough but fair, offering words of encouragement to recruits who showed promise and gentle correction to those who needed improvement. "What's your name, soldier?" Hayes asked Tommy Rodriguez, who was standing 3 positions ahead of Sarah. "Private Rodriguez, ma'am. Tommy Rodriguez, from San Antonio, Texas." "What made you join the Army?" Private Rodriguez. "My father served in Iraq, ma'am. I want to continue the family tradition of service." Hayes smiled and moved on to the next recruit. With each step closer, Sarah's heart rate increased. She had faced enemy fire without flinching, had parachuted into hostile territory in complete darkness, had breached doors not knowing what waited on the other side. But standing here, waiting for recognition from her former commanding officer, was somehow more terrifying than any mission she had ever undertaken. Finally, General Hayes stood directly in front of her. For a moment, Hayes simply looked at her, taking in every detail of her appearance. Sarah maintained perfect military bearing, eyes focused straight ahead, but she could feel the general's intense scrutiny. "What's your name, recruit?" Hayes asked, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she had used with all the others. "Private Martinez, ma'am." "Sarah Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona." There was a long pause. Sarah could sense something changing in the general's demeanor, a subtle shift that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know Hayes as well as she did. The general's eyes narrowed slightly, and she stepped closer. "Martinez," Hayes repeated slowly. "That's an interesting name. Have we met before, Private?" "No, ma'am," Sarah replied, maintaining her rigid posture. "This is my first time meeting a general." Hayes walked around Sarah, ostensibly inspecting her uniform and equipment, but Sarah knew she was being examined more closely than any of the other recruits. When Hayes returned to stand in front of her, she reached out and gently turned Sarah's left hand, revealing a small scar across her knuckles. "That's an interesting scar, Private Martinez. How did you get it?" Sarah's mind raced. She had rehearsed cover stories for every aspect of her background, but she hadn't expected Hayes to notice such a small detail. The scar was from a piece of shrapnel during a mission in Afghanistan 3 years ago. "Training accident during high school football, ma'am. Caught my hand in some equipment." Hayes nodded but didn't release her hand. Instead, she rolled up Sarah's sleeve slightly, revealing the edge of another scar on her forearm. This one was from a knife wound she had received during hand-to-hand combat training with the SEALs. "You seem to have had several training accidents, Private." "I was always pretty clumsy as a kid, ma'am." The general's expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in her mind. Hayes was putting together pieces of a puzzle, and Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before the picture became clear. "Tell me about your background, Private Martinez. Where did you go to school? What jobs did you have before enlisting?" Sarah launched into her prepared backstory about community college and working various civilian jobs, but she could tell that Hayes wasn't really listening to her words. Instead, the general was studying her posture, her bearing, the way she held her weapon. These were things that couldn't be hidden or disguised, ingrained habits that came from years of elite military training. As Sarah spoke, she noticed Hayes's aide, Colonel Morrison, watching the interaction with growing curiosity. Other officers in the entourage had also stopped to observe what was clearly becoming more than a routine inspection. "Private Martinez," Hayes interrupted, "would you mind demonstrating your weapon cleaning procedure?" This was not a normal request during an inspection, but Sarah couldn't refuse a direct order from a general. She began disassembling her rifle and immediately knew she had made a mistake. Her hands moved with the speed and precision of someone who had performed this task thousands of times under combat conditions. She completed the disassembly in under 90 seconds, a time that would have impressed even veteran soldiers. The other recruits in the formation were watching in amazement. Even Drill Sergeant Williams looked surprised at the display of expertise. "Interesting technique," Hayes observed. "Where did you learn to do that so quickly?" "YouTube videos, ma'am. I practiced a lot before enlisting, but as Sarah reassembled the weapon, her muscle memory betrayed her once again. She unconsciously performed a brass check and function test that was specific to special operations protocols. Techniques that were not taught in basic training and certainly not available in YouTube videos. General Hayes stepped closer, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. That's a very advanced technique for someone who learned from internet videos, Private. Sarah realized her mistake too late. She had just demonstrated specialized knowledge that no basic training recruit should possess. The careful cover story she had constructed was crumbling with each passing second. Private Martinez, Hayes said, her voice returning to normal volume but carrying an unmistakable tone of authority. I'm going to ask you one more time. Have we met before? Sarah looked directly into Hayes's eyes for the first time since the inspection began. She saw recognition there, clear and unmistakable. The general knew exactly who she was. No, ma'am, Sarah replied, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. Hayes nodded slowly, then did something that surprised everyone present. She stepped back and saluted Sarah. A gesture of respect from a superior officer to a subordinate that was completely unprecedented in this setting. Private Martinez, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You have the finest weapon maintenance skills I have seen in quite some time. Your attention to detail is exemplary. Sarah returned the salute, confused by the general's response but grateful that her true identity hadn't been revealed publicly. Thank you, ma'am. Hayes moved on to complete the rest of the inspection. But Sarah could feel the general's eyes returning to her repeatedly. Whatever was going to happen next, Sarah knew this was far from over. After the inspection was completed and the general had given a brief speech to the recruits about service and dedication, Hayes approached Drill Sergeant Williams. Sergeant, I'd like to speak with Private Martinez privately. Please have her report to the commander's office in 30 minutes. Williams looked confused but nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure she's there. As the general's convoy prepared to leave, Hayes walked past Sarah one more time. Without breaking stride, she spoke quietly enough that only Sarah could hear. 30 minutes, Petty Officer Martinez. We have a lot to discuss. The use of her former rank sent a chill down Sarah's spine. General Hayes knew exactly who she was. And now, Sarah would have to face the consequences of her decision to hide her true identity. Sarah stood outside the commander's office, her hand raised to knock on the door. She had spent the last 30 minutes trying to prepare for this conversation. But how do you explain to a general why you abandoned an elite military career to start over as a basic recruit? Enter, came General Hayes's voice from inside the office. Sarah opened the door and stepped into the room, immediately snapping to attention. The office was small and functional, with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with military regulations and training schedules. General Hayes sat behind the desk, having removed her service cap to reveal more of her gray hair. Close the door and have a seat, Sarah. The use of her first name instead of her rank or last name caught Sarah off guard. She closed the door and sat in the chair across from General Hayes, maintaining her military posture despite the informal tone. You can relax, Hayes said, leaning back in her chair. Sarah allowed some of the tension to leave her shoulders but remained alert. General Hayes was studying her with the same intense focus she had shown during the inspection. But now there was something else in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe disappointment. I have to admit, Sarah, when I first saw you in that formation, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Petty Officer, First Class, Sarah Martinez. One of the most decorated special operations soldiers I've ever had the privilege to command. Standing in a line with basic training recruits, Hayes opened a file folder that had been sitting on the desk. Sarah could see her official Navy personnel record, thick with commendations and classified operation reports. Your record speaks for itself, Hayes continued. 8 years of exemplary service. 2 Navy Crosses. 3 Bronze Stars. A Purple Heart. Mission success rate of 97%. Recommendations from every commanding officer you served under. And then, 3 months ago, you simply disappeared. Sarah remained silent, unsure of what she could say that would make sense of her decision. The Navy is still looking for you, you know. When a SEAL of your caliber goes missing, it raises questions. National security questions. There are people in Washington who want to know what happened to you, whether you were compromised, whether classified information was at risk. This was exactly what Sarah had feared. By running from her past, she had created a bigger problem than the one she was trying to escape. I need to know what happened, Sarah. Not as a general asking a subordinate, but as someone who cares about the soldiers who have served under her command. What drove you away from the SEALs? For the first time since entering the office, Sarah met General Hayes's eyes directly. She saw genuine concern there. Not just professional obligation. It was the mission in Syria, ma'am. Operation Desert Rose. Hayes's expression grew somber. She knew about Operation Desert Rose, though the details were classified at the highest levels. It had been a hostage rescue mission that had succeeded in saving 12 American contractors but had cost the life of one SEAL operator. Maria Gonzalez, Hayes said quietly. Yes, ma'am. She died because of a decision I made. I ordered the team to breach the south wall, instead of waiting for the backup team to get into position. If we had waited another 10 minutes, Maria would still be alive. Sarah's voice remained steady, but Hayes could see the pain in her eyes. The weight of command decisions that cost lives was something every military leader had to face. But for special operations soldiers, where teams were small and bonds were tight, losing someone was devastating. The mission reports indicated that your decision saved the hostages. If you had waited for backup, intelligence suggested the hostages would have been moved or eliminated. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Mission success. 12 lives saved. The greater good. Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly. But Maria had 2 kids at home. A husband who doesn't understand why his wife died for strangers. A mother who asks me every week in her letters why I came home, and her daughter didn't. Hayes leaned forward, her voice becoming gentler. Survivor's guilt is common among combat veterans, Sarah. There are resources, counseling, ways to work through these feelings without throwing away your entire career. I tried that, ma'am. 3 months of therapy, medical leave, desk assignments. Nothing helped. Every time I picked up a weapon, every time I suited up for a mission, all I could think about was Maria. I couldn't trust my judgment anymore. In special operations, hesitation gets people killed. I couldn't risk being responsible for another loss. Sarah paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. So I left. I know how it looks, and I know the problems it's caused. But I needed to find a way to serve my country without carrying the weight of life and death decisions for other people. I left carrying the build. General Hayes was quiet for several minutes, processing what Sarah had told her. She had seen many good soldiers destroyed by combat trauma, but it was rare to see someone handle it by trying to restart their military career rather than leaving service entirely. Why the Army, Sarah? Why basic training? You could have taken a medical discharge, gone to college, started a civilian career. Because I'm still a soldier, ma'am. It's who I am. It's what I know. I just needed to step back, to remember why I joined the military in the first place. Before the classified missions and the pressure and the politics, I wanted to serve alongside regular soldiers, to do my part without having to make decisions that cost lives. Hayes nodded slowly, beginning to understand Sarah's reasoning. And you thought you could just blend in? Hide 8 years of elite military training? I was careful, ma'am. I held back during physical training, simplified my responses during tactical exercises. I just didn't expect to run into someone who knew me personally. Sarah, you can't hide that level of training. It shows in everything you do. From the way you stand to the way you clean your weapon. Any experienced officer would notice something unusual about you. Hayes stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training fields where recruits were practicing drill movements. The question now is what we do about this situation. You're technically AWOL from the Navy, enlisted in the Army under false pretenses, and in possession of classified information that makes your current status a security risk. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had known this moment would come, but hearing the charges laid out so clearly made the consequences real. However, Hayes continued, turning back to face Sarah, I also see a soldier who's struggling with trauma, but still wants to serve her country. Someone who made a difficult decision for what she believed were the right reasons. Hayes returned to her seat and opened another file. I'm going to make you an offer, Sarah. I need someone with your experience for a special assignment. Not special operations, nothing classified, but something that would make use of your skills while giving you the chance to work through your issues. Sarah looked up, surprised by this unexpected turn. There's a new program starting up, designed to help train instructors for advanced combat skills. You would be working with experienced soldiers, teaching them techniques that could save lives in combat situations. No life and death command decisions, no classified missions, just sharing knowledge that could help other soldiers come home safely. Hayes slid a document across the desk. The position comes with a promotion to staff sergeant and a clean slate regarding your current situation. The Navy would transfer you to the Army with full honors, and your record would reflect a voluntary branch transfer rather than abandonment of post. Sarah stared at the document, hardly believing what she was hearing. Why would you do this for me, ma'am? I've caused nothing but problems. Because 8 years ago, I recommended a young sailor for her first special operations assignment. I watched her grow into one of the finest soldiers I've ever known. And because losing good soldiers to bureaucracy and inflexible thinking is a bigger tragedy than losing them to enemy action. Hayes leaned forward, her expression serious. But this is a one-time offer, Sarah. You take this assignment. You get the help you need to work through your trauma. And you serve with distinction. If you run again, if you can't handle the responsibility, there won't be another chance. You'll face the full consequences of your actions. Sarah thought about the offer for several minutes. It wasn't the anonymity she had been seeking, but it was a chance to serve while dealing with her guilt and trauma. More importantly, it was a chance to help other soldiers without bearing the weight of command decisions. What about my fellow recruits? Ma'am? They're good people. I don't want my leaving to reflect badly on them or cause problems with their training. Hayes smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Your concern for your fellow soldiers tells me I'm making the right decision. They'll be told that you've been selected for advanced training due to exceptional performance, which, technically, is true. Sarah stood up and saluted. I accept your offer, General Hayes, and thank you for giving me a second chance. Hayes returned the salute. Don't thank me yet, Staff Sergeant Martinez. Prove that my faith in you is justified. Help other soldiers learn the skills they need to survive and complete their missions. And find a way to honor Maria's memory through service, rather than carrying it as a burden. As Sarah left the commander's office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The path forward wouldn't be easy, and she would still have to face her demons, but she would do it while serving her country and helping other soldiers. Walking back toward the barracks to collect her gear, Sarah thought about Maria Gonzalez. For the first time since that mission in Syria, she allowed herself to remember not just how Maria had died, but how she had lived. Maria had been a soldier who believed in service, in protecting others, in making sure her teammates came home safely. Maybe the best way to honor her friend's memory wasn't to run from the responsibility of military service, but to find a way to serve that would help other soldiers survive their own dangerous missions. Maybe Maria would have approved of this new direction. Sarah Martinez had spent 3 months running from her past. Now it was time to face forward and build a future that honored both her service and her sacrifice.